Ancient humans with albinism should never have survived. At least that's what common sense tells us. Imagine standing on the open grasslands of prehistoric Africa, surrounded by lions, leopards, hyenas, and other predators, while your skin is brighter than everyone else's. No camouflage, poor eyesight, skin that burns under the same sun everyone else seems to handle just fine. On paper, it sounds like a death sentence, and yet people with albinism existed generation after generation across different human populations. So here's the question I want you to sit with for the next few minutes. Not whether they survived. We already know they did. What actually happened the moment a predator was staring straight at one of them? Because there's an answer to that, and it's not the one you're expecting. But before I show you that moment, you need to understand exactly how bad the odds looked. Picture yourself nearly 100,000 years ago, around 4.5 feet tall, skin with almost no pigment, hair pale, eyes that struggle to focus in bright light, out on the open savanna. You don't blend into the landscape, you stand out. And it's not just visibility. Albinism often affects how the eye develops. The fovea, the part responsible for sharp central vision, frequently doesn't form normally. The result is reduced clarity, poor depth perception, constant involuntary eye movement, and painful sensitivity to bright light. Then there's the sun itself. No melanin means skin burns fast, scars easily, carries a lifelong risk of serious damage. No hats, no sunscreen, just relentless daily exposure. 3 disadvantages stacked on top of each other. Go ahead and ask yourself the obvious question. Why didn't predators simply pick them off? But this is where everything starts to fall apart. The answer has almost nothing to do with the person. It has everything to do with what was happening inside the predator's head. So what did the predator actually see? And once you understand that, the whole story flips. Most of us instinctively picture the same thing. Bright skin equals an instant target. Wrong. Lions, leopards, and hyenas don't hunt primarily by color. They hunt using movement, isolation, opportunity, wind direction, and cover. A person standing still, shoulder to shoulder with 20 others, is a far harder read than a single moving figure out in the open. Now here's a fact almost nobody mentions, and it changes everything that comes after it. Humans weren't only prey, they were also predators, capable of tracking an animal for hours across open country until it collapsed from exhaustion. Researchers call it persistence hunting. So ask yourself this. If you were a lion who had already watched a human group run down prey for 6 straight hours in the heat, would you want to test that group? A carnivore that had crossed paths with human bands before had likely already learned something uncomfortable. These upright, slow-looking primates could out-endure almost anything on the savannah, and they didn't fight fair. They fought as a group, with weapons, with fire, and with a willingness to chase. That reputation didn't just protect the hunters, it protected everyone standing next to them, including the one person in the group everyone assumed was the most exposed. Which brings us to the moment I promised you. Let's stop for a second. Flip the camera. Now, imagine you're the lion. You don't know one human has poor eyesight. You don't know another burns easily in the sun. You can't see any of that. All you see is 30 upright primates carrying spears, shouting in unison, throwing rocks, closing ranks, refusing to break apart. Ask yourself, would you attack that? From where you're standing, an attack isn't a guaranteed meal. It's a gamble with your own body on the line, and your body is the only tool you have. A broken leg, a torn muscle, a deep gash from a thrown spear, any of those can mean a slow death by starvation weeks later, long after the wound has healed. So the lion isn't deciding whether it's brave enough to attack. It's calculating risk, and a tight, coordinated, retaliating group of ancient humans is one of the worst risks on the entire landscape. From the lion's perspective, There isn't an albino human standing in that group. There's only a human group. One single organism, as far as the lion is concerned, that bites back. That's the moment I promised you. That's what the predator actually saw. But knowing what the predator saw only answers half the question. What happened when a predator actually tested that theory? This isn't just theory. Watch what actually happens. Among the Hadza of Tanzania, ethnographers describe a night bush still prowled by lions, leopards, and hyenas, and camp life built entirely around managing that risk. Fires kept burning, people staying close together after dark, real caution baked into daily routine. Accounts of hunter-gatherer groups confronting an approaching predator describe a consistent pattern. People don't scatter. They come together, raise noise, grab burning branches from the fire, and hold their ground as a group. Predators in these accounts typically break off and retreat rather than press an attack against a unified, noisy group. But here's where it gets more interesting. Not every predator behaves the same way. Hyenas do something almost the opposite. They don't charge, they test, circling at a distance, watching, waiting for a gap. That single difference between a lion backing off and a hyena circling for a gap tells you something that most people completely miss. Isolation was the real danger, not albinism. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies consistently note that people rarely traveled alone in predator-rich environments precisely because a lone human of any appearance was catastrophically more vulnerable than one inside a group. Which means an albino individual who stayed inside the group was statistically safer from predators than a fully sighted person who wandered off alone. Read that again. Their biggest risk was never their biology, it was distance from the fire. But that raises a question that's about to matter a lot more than you think. If eyesight wasn't protecting anyone individually, what actually was? Here's the piece that finally reframes the whole story. A leopard, lying motionless in tall grass, might genuinely be spotted last by the one person in the band with the weakest vision. But that person was never hunting alone. They were surrounded by 20 or 30 other people, scanning the horizon from different angles, at different distances, at different heights. Think about what that actually requires of the leopard. It didn't have to fool one pair of eyes, it had to fool all of them at the same time, without a single one noticing a flick of movement in the grass. That's an extraordinarily difficult thing for any predator to pull off. Group vigilance research on hunter-gatherer bands, the Hadza, the Ju/Hwansi, the Ake, Australian Aboriginal groups, shows exactly this pattern. Multiple adults scan constantly while traveling, and visually weaker members are kept toward the center, not the edges, and roles matter too. Documented divisions of labor in these societies include food processing, childcare, tool repair, fire maintenance, and camp surveillance, alongside hunting. Someone whose vision made tracking dangerous could still anchor camp defense, tend the fire that kept every predator at a distance, or watch the children while others gathered. The group didn't need every member to see equally well. It needed the combined result to be nearly impossible to slip past. Now here's something I haven't told you yet, something almost nobody talks about. There's one deliberate decision ancient humans made, a decision that had nothing to do with eyesight or fire or numbers, that mattered just as much as all of it combined. Here it is. Many hunter-gatherer bands deliberately chose campsites for one specific reason: uninterrupted sightlines in every direction. Open ground, high ground, a clear view to the tree line. Not comfort, not convenience. Because a predator that has to cross open space to reach a camp has already lost the one advantage it depends on most: surprise. Smoke from the fire likely helped too. It's well established that fire itself deters most large predators, and many researchers believe the smoke drifting across a camp's perimeter added a further layer of disruption, making it harder for predators to track scent on the air. For someone with albinism specifically, that same daily rhythm carried an extra benefit. Camps positioned near rock overhangs or dense tree cover gave people a place to retreat during the harshest midday sun, and the group's broader pattern of resting through peak heat and moving in early morning or evening reduced everyone's sun exposure, but reduced theirs the most. None of these choices were built around any single person's condition. They were built to make the entire group nearly unapproachable. Whoever stood inside that perimeter, whatever their eyesight, inherited the exact same wall. So at this point, every predator-side threat has an answer. Group defense, predator psychology, vigilance, camp design, which means, logically, every person with albinism who stayed inside that system should have been safe. So why weren't they all safe? Why does the historical record show some of them dying anyway, not from claws or teeth, but from something else entirely? Here's the answer, and it's the twist the whole video has been building toward. If predators mostly weren't deciding who lived or died, their own communities were. Among the Kuno people of Panama, individuals with albinism were known as saipus, or children of the moon, believed to defend the moon itself during a lunar eclipse. Sounds like total protection, right? Except the same population, documented across decades of research by geneticist Clyde Keeler, also recorded infant killings and severe barriers to marriage for albino men. One population, two completely different responses to the exact same condition. Now compare that to the Hopi and Zuni peoples of the American Southwest, who generally accepted people with albinism into full community life, even adjusting daily routines so men could stay indoors during the harshest sun. And in the 1850s, explorer David Livingstone documented a mother in what's now Botswana who refused to let her son be killed as local custom expected and was expelled from her own village for that choice. Mother and son survived anyway. Same biology, same predators, same physical risks, completely different human decisions, which means the real threat in this entire story was never the one we started with. And it's still not finished playing out. Put every piece together and the full picture finally locks into place. Predators mostly weren't the deciding factor. A lion calculating risk, a hyena testing the edges, a camp with clear sightlines and a fire burning all night. Those forces treated everyone in the group roughly the same. The variable that actually mattered was whether the group chose to keep its most vulnerable member inside that protection or pushed them out of it. Where the group held, the individual lived long enough to have children, and the gene persisted in that population. Where it didn't, the line usually ended fast. That single choice, repeated across thousands of generations, is a big part of why some populations carry meaningfully higher rates of albinism today and others don't. It was never really a story about which humans predators chose to attack. It was a story about which humans their own people chose to keep standing inside the fire's light. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. That decision was never permanently settled, not thousands of years ago, not now. The United Nations maintains a dedicated position focused on the rights of people with albinism because in parts of sub-Saharan Africa today, people with albinism still face violence rooted in superstition, not biology. Thousands of years later, the greatest danger still usually isn't nature. So if you ask how ancient humans with albinism survived predators, here's the honest answer. To a lion, there was never an albino human standing in that group. There was only a group, coordinated, loud, armed, and willing to fight back. Their eyesight didn't need to be perfect. 20 other pairs of eyes made sure of that. The predators outside the firelight never once asked who looked different. Only their own people ever asked that question, and in some places they're still answering it, which leaves you with one last thing to sit with. If the lions were never really the danger, what does that tell you about every other story you've been told was about survival of the fittest? If questions like this keep you thinking long after the video ends, you're exactly who this channel is for. Subscribe and join me as we uncover the strange, unexpected, and often overlooked stories that shaped who we are. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.